Hi, everyone, and welcome to Healthy Living. I'm Chef AJ, and I'm very excited to interview tonight's guest. It's Dr. Pam Peeke. She is the New York Times bestselling author of 3 books, Fight Fat After 40, Body for Life for Women, and The Hunger Fix, the 3-stage detox and recovery plan for overeating and food addiction. Dr. Peeke is a nationally renowned physician, scientist, and expert in preventive and integrative medicine. Dr. Peeke is a Pew Foundation Scholar in Nutrition and Metabolism, Assistant Professor of Medicine at the University of Maryland, and Fellow of both the American College of Physicians and the American College of Sports Medicine. And she is known as the edutainer. And her resume is so long that it would probably take the whole hour to read, so I'm going to stop right there. You can get more information on our website about her. But please welcome Dr. Peeke. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Well, we share a common mission, and that's to get the message out there about healthy living and certainly nutrition. And so let's dish it up.
Right. You know, I first saw you 2 years ago speak at the McDougall Advanced Study Weekend, and I just thought you were first of all, you're beautiful looking and you're gorgeous, and you're just such an entertaining and phenomenal speaker. I really enjoyed your presentations there.
Well, thank you very much. He is a very good friend of mine, and since we're both physicians, we kind of share, again, the same common mission, and it works. And this is when I was talking about the brand new science of food addiction and really sharing a lot of the now credible NIH-based science on the relationship between food and addiction.
How did you first get interested in this subject, Dr. Peeke? Is this something that you ever struggled with yourself?
Well, really, it goes a couple of different ways. Number one, as a physician of many, many years working in this field, I'm a bit of an oddball because I'm a physician actually trained in nutrition as a Pew Foundation Scholar, and also my years at the National Institutes of Health as a senior research scientist. And one of the things that I found was that the grand majority of my patients sound like little junkies. And I said this in my book, The Hunger Fix, which is the first consumer book on food and addiction.
Which I love, by the way, and I recommend. And a few people, when we sent it out to the mailing list, that you were going to be on, they said, why did she have to put that delicious-looking cupcake on the book?
Well, it was very interesting. It's because, that's my little crack, and it became a bit of a joke to a certain degree. I say just, cut the cupcake out if it's really triggering you. But it was something that was really getting the point across mass media, and the grand majority of people got the, that whole message loud and clear because we really wanted to try to, in a transparent way, get the point across that, we live in a society that basically triggers us every 5 seconds if it took that long, and that's kind of where we are. But I got interested in it because, the grand majority of us as experts in the field, we get together at conferences over the years and say, do you really think there's something to this whole, addictive eating thing? Because all of our patients sounded the same, and all of us, we're also struggling at some level along the spectrum because there's all this stuff out there, the highly processed, highly refined food and beverage products. I really can't grace some of this stuff with even, calling it a food. It's more like a science fair project. But but there it was. And then all of a sudden, Dr. Nora Volkow, who is the director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse, herself a sort of a self-avowed chocoholic, and someone who also comes from a family of addiction, and in her case, alcoholism, she began to take this on herself and began to publish in the early 2000s brand new research that basically capitalized on something we never had before. And that was brain scanning. We had brain imaging tools now. And now we had a way to look into the reward center of the brain, and we had a way to look at the prefrontal cortex, that's sort of the smarty pants part of the brain that helps us say yay or nay, reins in impulsivity. And oh my gosh, it was like your brain and your whole head went from a black box to this extraordinary, series of brain scans that helped us understand what was going on in all addictive processes across the board, whether it was alcohol, drugs, whether it was gambling. It's funny about food because food is both. It's a process addiction and a substance addiction. So it's a fascinating one because it crosses both areas. Lo and behold, what we found in the brain, AJ, was amazing. What we found was that the reward center of the brain across the board showed precisely the same change. And this is a biological, organic change that takes place in vulnerable brains. That means about 1 out of every 12 women, for instance. And, what we found was that a vulnerable brain, and this is based on work done at Harvard, was a brain, and again, much more so in a woman than a man, that had suffered some kind of, in the eyes of the beholder, right, abuse or trauma during childhood, teenage years, and early adulthood, but especially in the first 20 years of life. This basically made you more vulnerable toward addictive-like eating, and for that matter, what they found in their research was that if you had a history like that, the incidence went up, get this, 90%, because you were self-soothing. What else do you do when you're 5 years old, 7 years old? You're not like going to go out and score meth or something. You're going to grab something that makes you feel good. And as a chef, AJ, you know that food, but especially the uber, sugary, fatty, salty food combos really turns all that on. And then, boom, changes take place in the reward center that are reversible once you go through, the appropriate treatment. But while you're still, still feeding that fire, then you're going to see these changes basically stay put.
This makes total sense because you mentioned in the book, The Hunger Fix, that stress in general, especially early childhood stress, affects that prefrontal cortex. And it seems like every person I've worked with that is a food addict has had some history of early childhood, either abuse or trauma or something like that in their life.
Well, there's no question. And we've now seen that PTSD does this. There's no question that the formative years, and I say basically the first 20 years, are so powerful. They leave, I speak about in the Hunger Fix also the new science of epigenetics, which means that you could turn on and off genes in your body. And so, by a variety of things, by environmental things that happen, as well as your own lifestyle choices, we find that there's a sweet spot that takes place in childhood and adolescence during those years when something happens to you that you as a child or a teenager or a young adult perceive as really tough, traumatic, something like that, it leaves a molecular mark. And that leaves you much more vulnerable. Later, as part of the treatment, which we'll talk about in a bit, what we find is that you have to reframe all of that. And you've got to, also deal with the biological end of this. A lot of people for a long time thought this was all psychological.
Yeah.
There's no question. Psychology is hugely powerful here. I mean, it's huge. But we never knew what the biological end of this was. Now we do because we have the science behind it. So I call it a psychobiological phenomenon.
Right. I'm so glad you're doing this work, Dr. Peeke, because so many people that I've interviewed on this show, there have been some experts in food addiction, but some even medical doctors just don't even believe it's real. And I think maybe the name food addiction is a little bit of a misnomer because it's not the food that's addictive, it's certain types of food, right?
Well, in science, we call it, oftentimes, how in science we make everything a tad more, flowery. But what we say in science, for instance, is that it's addictive-like eating behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
But the Harvard scientists, as well as others, Ashley Gearhart, the University of Michigan, and the other people who actually put together the tools to be able to assess addictive eating behavior. It's called the Yale Food Addiction Scale, which you can download off the internet, or the Hunger Fix has both the long version we use in research or the short version, or you go to my website at drpeeke.com. That's DRPEEKE.com. Look on the left where it says, food addiction, and if you click on that, there's a quick JavaScript quiz, which will say, hey, are you a food? And within literally 60 seconds, you'll be able to answer all of those things fairly quickly. But even if you don't meet criteria, the mass majority of people know full well the foods for which they lose control and feel shame, blame, and guilt. Mm-hmm. And then they, even if they don't meet perfect criteria, honey, they're on the launch pad. So all of these scientists, all of us, got together and we said to ourselves, you know something? The kinds of foods especially that tend to knock people through the stratosphere oftentimes are the ones that give you what I call uber reward, mm-hmm. meaning that the reward center in your brain was never ever geared to be able to deal with the kinds of drugs, alcohol, and certain refined processed foods, mm-hmm. and the level of reward it gives you. It results in a hyperstimulation of the reward center, and it fights back for its own survival by making specific changes that then cause tolerance or the beginning of the addictive cycle. And that has to do with the dopamine secretion and changes in the receptors up there that we've been able to document. I've laid all of this out really simply in my book, The Hunger Fix. Mm-hmm. But, what I'm trying to say is that the science is powerful. The grand majority of people who don't believe it are people who've never read the science. Yeah. Because when you actually quiz them, I'm not kidding you, I'm telling you that one of the most powerful scientists on this planet is Dr. Nora Volkow, who's an addiction psychiatrist and the director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse of the 17 institutes of the NIH, for crying out loud. She is utterly, absolutely brilliant, and she's the one who has done most of the original research on this, and then now as director, which is an incredibly powerful position. There's only, I think, 3 female directors of the 17 institutes. She's a very highly accomplished scientist. She has funded now even more studies, and there's just no question in our mind that this phenomenon exists. And you have to read the science. It's exquisitely beautiful and compelling, and that's why the grand majority of us published The Hunger Fix. It hit the New York Times bestsellers list in 5 days. And the number one feedback I got, I had a tsunami of feedback, but the number one feedback I got was, what took you so long? And then it was this relief. And I know that, you've probably run into this too, AJ, when people say, I thought I was going out of my mind. I thought that I just had no willpower and I'm just some loser, mm-hmm. only to find out, wait a minute, this is an actual phenomenon. This is a condition that needs treatment, that is not some kind of I have no willpower, I have no discipline, and I'm a loser play. This mm-hmm. is a real psychobiological phenomenon. Food addiction is real.
Right, and thank you so much, because I was a sugar addict, food addict, at least for the first 43 years of my life, and I was obese. And I remember saying to my doctor, well, I think sugar is addictive. Oh, no, it's not. This was like 20 years ago. So it's great that, people like you are, bringing this to the forefront. Do you think it will ever be an actual diagnosis in the DSM?
There's something that's interesting about that. And that is that food addiction, and this is what's interesting, this addictive-like eating process is not, it's all over the place. For instance, cross addiction if you've had an eating disorder, for instance, that the cross addiction between the eating disorder and substance abuse is anywhere between 50 to 72%. That's huge, and what it taught us it's sort of a very common phenomenon across the board to look at it in cross addiction as you're coming off one thing, for instance, whether it's alcohol or drugs, then especially in stimulants and alcohol, you find yourself jumping right onto refined sugar, and the fatty foods and the rest of it.
Hence the donuts at the AA meeting,
well, it's an interesting phenomenon. One of the things that I found disturbing was that, what you're doing is you're just hopping from one to the other. There was a piece written about my work in the New York Times about a year ago by Abby Allen, and I'm just about ready to give the keynote at the National Conference on Addiction Disorders in St. Louis in another week and a half. And the name of that talk is the same title from the New York Times piece because they loved it. It's called Off the Drugs, Onto the Cupcakes. And, it's the whole history of cross-addiction. When people come out of bariatric surgery after being compulsive eaters and bingers for years, 30% of them become alcoholic.
I've heard that. That's unreal. But I've heard that happening.
But it makes sense.
Yeah.
As Dr. Volkol has said, and myself, that, as you close the door to one, you open up another, because what's happening is there's this incredible need to self-soothe. And if you have also, in addition to trauma and whatever else, if you happen to have a family history of addiction, it just compounds this whole thing. And the same thing goes with a family history of depression, anxiety, OCD, that type of thing. So it's all kind of complicated. So, it's interesting. The grand majority of people who come in with food addiction who need help also have co-occurrings. They have anxiety, they have depression, they have the Achilles heel of all addictive conditions is a real tough time adapting and adjusting to stress or stress resilience. And so it's just easier then to self-soothe. And one of the most powerful things we do in treatment is to put that trauma, put that abuse, put whatever it was on the table, confront it, look at it, reframe it, work with it, and then help show these wonderful men and women, what kind of tools they need to be able to cope with stress in a way that does not involve self-destructive behaviors. And that one of the things we have to do just biologically and just technically and practically is to rearrange that whole food thing. Now, AJ, that I am an absolute culinary freak here. All of my work has been done with culinary nutritionists and chefs like yourself who are masters at being able to take what I call in the hunger fix false fixes, the sugary, fatty, salty food combos that say, oh, come hither, and cave to the crave, and everything will be just fine tomorrow, but could just come on over here and have just one, that just word. But now what I do is I take those false fixes and I switch them out with healthy fixes, and I challenge all of my chefs with the fact that when people are in residence for whatever kind of mental health and or addictive issue, that if someone comes up and says, I just can't live without, and then fill in the blank, 35, liters of Mountain Dew every day, or, all the cookies and candy I can lay my hand on. For every one of my chefs, I say, you're going to give them not one, but 3 alternatives, and 3 alternatives that will blow their mind, that will not involve refined and processed foods. And then we kind of, go through this marvelous new, what I call, a recovery cuisine. And this recovery cuisine is a beautiful opportunity for everyone to be able to start doing the switch outs immediately, and then to be able to make that detox and recovery so much more livable, because there you have it. I'm going to tell all the listeners and yourself, AJ, 2 marvelous questions that will help guide you throughout the day and also help whomever you're helping. And that is, when food or beverage is put in front of you, you ask yourself these 2 questions. The first question is, if I consume this, will I feel loss of control? The second question is, if I consume this, will I feel shame, blame, and guilt? If the answer is yes, and it usually is to both because they kind of go hand in hand, then this is what I like to teach my wonderful people I work with what to say. And what you really want to say here is this. You say, whatever's sitting in front of me doesn't work for me. It just doesn't work for me. I lose control. I feel shame, blame, and guilt. It's not working for me. Notice I didn't say, immediately you are to say no, never again, and abstinence, the whole thing. Instead, what I like to say is it just doesn't work for me. It's not working for me because I like you to take control. I want you to own it. I want you to be able to be empowered with that statement. It doesn't work for me because by saying that, then you're inferring that you do know what works for you. So an apple works for you. Grilled chicken on a bed of greens works for you. But maybe, that big sugary soda sitting there doesn't work for you because you lose control, feel shame, blame, and guilt, and you're just, drinking tons of this stuff. And who wants to have to feel like that? And then immediately switch it out. How about fruit-infused water? Yeah. Beautiful fruit, just floating in it. And you could buy those beautiful decanters for almost nothing in pitchers at Bed Bath & Beyond, at Costco, anywhere. But there's lots of creative ways to get around that. And I think that's what's really important here.
Yeah. So, you mentioned that if we have early stress up till the age of 20, that makes us more vulnerable. Are there other things that make people more susceptible? Because there seems to be some people, like my husband, that are not plagued by this. And they'll say, well, they can take a bag of cookies and eat one and put the other back for like months and not even think about it.
And that's, it's really interesting. When it comes to men and women, there's a real gender specificity here. Men, interestingly, veer much more toward alcohol if they want to numb things. So they'll be much more inclined to grab a beer, a glass of wine, or a bottle, or, whatever, and then go with that. Women are much more inclined to go with the food. And it's just sort of a little bit of our hardwiring, number one. Number two, if there's a history, a genetic history of addiction in the family, that places you at much higher risk for running into addictive-like eating behaviors and cross-addictions. And so if you see that, mom is an alcoholic and dad's a drug addict, you have to say to yourself, ruh-roh, we can run into problems here. And if I were you, I would definitely, not be imbibing very much at all, and I would definitely be on the red alert and get into, types of behaviors that you can kind of, as it were, get hooked on, like, not being hyper about your exercise, but getting out there and just doing good physical activity because it helps de-stress. It helps give you stress resilience, just so long as you don't do it too much, because people sometimes do that, and then that's just as self-destructive as everything else. So being having a genetic history, and then obviously what we call epigenetics. Let's just say your genetics are clean as a whistle, but you grow up in a household where all you're surrounded with is junk. Okay, well, that'll definitely put you at higher risk. But, genetically and epigenetically, there are those people who are just impervious to this. Because they're not hardwired. They do not have the gene expression to be as vulnerable as other people. the self-soothing with food, the addictive-like things with food, if you ask your husband what he does when he's totally stressed out, he'll give you a very different answer. He might just go out to the gym and beat the heck out of some, punching bag there, or he might run for 5 miles, or he might do something else. But it doesn't involve food.
Right, never.
And so he's just sort of going to a different place there.
But, people that don't have this affliction or don't know anybody that does, they say to people like us, well, what's the matter? Like, why can't you just push yourself away from the table? And that's sort of like saying to an alcoholic, why can't you just have a beer? Why can't you just have a beer?
Absolutely true. And right now, AJ, you bring up such an important point. And I feel such compassion and empathy for everyone out there when people are giving them the just thing. And that's what I write about all over the Hunger Fix, the just word. It's just a cookie. It's just a, pizza. And when you hear just, that begins a justification. And then we're all in trouble. And, what you have to do right now is instead of putting up a huge fight and, turning this into some big verbal, warfare, you just have to stand firm in a very classy, elegant way and just simply say, that just doesn't work for me, or, I'm really full right now, or, I much prefer to have this over here. See, I'm all calm. I'm not turning this into warfare. I'm just kind of going to that. Do you know, many years ago, AJ, alcohol is treated the same way. People would walk up to someone and say, what's wrong with you? Why can't you just have one glass of, whatever it is? There has to be something wrong with you. Well, as it turns out, that's not true. Right. Flash forward, we have all this evidence now that alcoholism is truly a medical illness, that addiction is a medical illness, and that, this isn't some kind of moral play here, that we have to be able to provide prevention and treatment. Well, we're not there yet with the food addiction thing, but boy, oh boy, are we getting there, because all you have to do is just Google food addiction and the whole stratosphere lights up. We're really making strides here.
Yeah, thank you for that. I remember, like, in the old days, doctors actually used to prescribe cigarettes to their patients with anxiety. It's like it's funny, we've come a long way with things like this.
Well, in the big book, which is the Alcoholics Anonymous book, right in there, they say, and this was written like in the 1930s, that if you're having a really rough time, with your detox, always keep candy around. That'll definitely make it. I'm like, oh my goodness gracious. Oh well, I think we have to kind of scratch that little Hummer right out.
Sure. I guess they need a revision. So you mentioned that in part of the treatment, you're reframing some of these stressful experiences people had. Is this something you do, or is it something they do with like a cognitive behavioral therapist? So where do they go for treatment?
Well, there's all kinds of ways to be able to do this. If you truly have had, these traumatic issues, these abusive issues, whatever happened to you, I mean, it could have been the trauma of your best friend being, run over by a car or something. It didn't have to be like you had abusive parents or something. I mean, like I said, it's in the eyes of the beholder, right? So if you really had that, I highly recommend that you work with a trauma therapist. Trauma therapists are subspecialists, and they use all kinds of different types of therapy, including dialectical as well as cognitive behavioral therapy and experiential. I mean, they're really, really good at getting to the heart of the matter, and I think it's worth its weight in platinum to be able to get help like that. I caution everyone who has addictive like eating behavior that that self-soothing was a big piece of this. You have to ask yourself, what were you self-soothing about?
Yeah.
And then have you processed that? Because you can go on silly diets and you could exercise till the cows come home and spend half your mortgage at a health club. And that's all real special. Is it really going to get you where you need to go? I'm a firm believer that mental weight, that the relieving of mental weight comes before the relieving of physical weight. And that once you really start reframing, processing, and working with it, at the same time, you're also now really making strides to get into the whole foods and off the other stuff. I think that once you do that, you're going to be able to see amazing things happen, because I've done it myself with my clients. I've established a national platform on this. It's a maverick new way to be able to look at this. I think that there are lots of resources out there. I know that there's Overeaters Anonymous, Food Addicts Anonymous, and all the rest of it. There's actually probably about 40 of them now, because they've really, created a whole bunch of them out there. It's a bit of a dizzying array. I think one of the most important things that people could get out of that type of a treatment is fellowship, knowing you're not alone.
Sure.
But it doesn't offer, the kind of dietary guidance that an excellent registered dietitian would give you, who is experienced with addictive eating behavior. And at the same time, it doesn't give you therapy when you need it. So in a way, you have to kind of put together an A-team to be able to help you, so that you have all of the components. In The Hunger Fix and all my other books, I talk about my 3 pillars: mind, mouth, and muscle.
Right, the 3 M's. Sure, I remember
You
that.
got it. Kind of try to make it simple, right, AJ? And, the mind is so terribly important. The mind rules. It totally rules. And you have to be able to put all of this in the right kind of framework to be able to even create a strategy to help yourself. And in the book, I parse this into all kinds of pieces. What's your main motivation? What's the power why behind all of this? And if you think it's only about just looking better and, health and stuff, it's usually something much deeper. And I try to help people find their own unique power why. Why does that, what is it that's going to help fuel you through the day? What is it that's going to make you feel more powerful, to be able to feel like you could believe, achieve, and finally succeed? In the eating component, it's about the detox and recovery and the switch out of the false fixes with the healthy fixes. And then with the physical activity, the muscle part, it's interesting. I say physical activity. I say just honestly glorify, move your beautiful body. Yoga is amazing.
Yep.
Taking beautiful meditative walks, just getting into your body, because so many people, I would say the mass majority, who have addictive-like eating are dissociated mind and body. And they just, they've lost complete track. They feel shame, blame, and guilt. They have self-denigration. And I ask them to practice self-forgiveness and self-compassion. And by doing that, you've opened a door to the healing process.
Yeah. Are you a big fitness person yourself, Dr. Peeke? Do you exercise regularly? And what just out of curiosity, because you look phenomenal, I'm just curious what you do for exercise.
Well, I started out as a tomboy, and I became an athlete over time, primarily to de-stress. But I was graced with a very, a wonderful muscular body that I've loved to use over the years. I'm actually a senior Olympian in the triathlon. And,
nice.
I've had a wonderful time keeping physically active and turning other people on to that. I've taken people on retreats at national parks around the country. I love to turn people onto their body. I find that physical activity is exquisitely healing. And I said physical activity. I'm a national fitness leader. And one of the things I love to do is to walk the talk, and that is when I say that I love to get on out there and take that walk and bring my wonderful canine with me. I always say walk your dog even if you don't have one. Just get on out there and just cherish your wonderful body and the fact that when you wake up in the morning, feel grateful that you still have moving parts at work, and then rock with it. And then I use that to mentor people through the healing process because they need to start believing in themselves. You know, on my Facebook, which is Dr. Pam Peeke, DrPamPeeke, I ask people to not only comment on my posts, which are always really fun and really bring home a lot of these points that I'm talking about right now, but also to message me, say, hey, you know, I heard you on AJ. I got this one particular, you know, personal question I want to ask you, blah, blah, blah. I feel such shame when I go to a gym. I feel completely out of control, you know, at family events, and I feel shame and blame about that. I don't know what to do. I love to get those messages, and I love to answer them. So make sure to get over to my Facebook page because I love to be able to help you that way, whether I'm teaching, you know, on television, radio, or anywhere else. I just love to be able to know that you've heard my message and you can rock with it.
I love to hear you in person. Is there any conferences that us lay people could go to, like the McDougall Advanced Study Weekend, where we could see you?
Well, you know, if you go to my website as well as my Facebook, I post all of this.
Right.
And so you can basically keep tracking with it. And then, AJ, I so love your work. And I'm all about, you know, cooking kitchens. I'm all about teaching how to be able to redefine your relationship with food. That's why I love your work. Because that's what you're helping people do, AJ.
Yep.
And what I love to do is sort of, you know, support that with the science behind it that says AJ's not only taking this wonderful produce and the whole foods in front of us and making them look fabulous and wonderful and delicious, and oh boy, can't wait to dive into them. But guess what you're also doing? You're changing gene expression. You're prolonging your life. You're able to change the bacterial colonies in your gastric, in your gut, what we call the microbiome, and we're able to actually change mood by what you're doing. And so it's so exciting putting it all together, which is why I'm such a huge fan of you know, the chefs that I've worked with. And AJ, you know, you're just doing an A+ job.
Well, thank you so much. You know, in one of the interviews, I heard you talk about meditation and how it helps reduce the urge to splurge. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I'm good with the food, good with the fitness, and I'm new to meditation now, and I didn't realize that that was also going to be such a helpful tool.
Meditation is a monster. It's just huge. We had very little real, you know, hardcore like NIH-based science until probably about the last, you know, half dozen years or so. And then all of a sudden, all heck broke out. Why? Because we have new tools to actually measure what happens with meditation. Well, let me tell you what happens. Let's look at like simple mindfulness. Now, mindfulness is both a lifestyle as well as a meditation. So you could be mindful of your breath, and you can close your eyes, and you could just sort of go to that place. Or you can just get up right now, be thoroughly mindful of everything that you see around you. You could see the flowers that you put in that vase, and you could be so grateful for them instead of just passing by them and not even knowing they exist. So this helps you, therefore, be mindful of every mouthful, to be mindful of every step that you take, to be mindful of how you're responding, not reacting, responding to what goes on around you. So you've got to practice. And this means that when you take yourself out of addictive mode, then your prefrontal cortex, the smarty pants part of your brain, right behind your forehead, then that part is able to practice, heal more and more and more from the addictive process and help strengthen your ability to make the right decisions as you go through the day. We've also found that mindfulness, as well as transcendental meditation or any kind of jerry-riggering and sort of cherry-picking you want to do between them, changes blood flow in the brain to be able to enhance circulation in the prefrontal cortex and change gene expression so that you're less inflammatory throughout your body, giving yourself a chance to be able to heal from the addictive process. So it all flows together. And I'm telling you right now, listen to me. I'm a physician, I'm a scientist, and I'm a national thought leader in this. And I'm telling you now that meditation is absolutely essential and integral to this entire process. By the way, prayer works. Prayer is one of the most powerful meditations. What I found, I learned TM. I know mindfulness. I studied with, my wonderful colleague, Herb Benson at the Harvard Mind-Body Institute. And I get all that, the relaxation response, the John Kabat-Zinn work with mindfulness, Thich Nhat Hanh, who the great Buddhist, monk, who was really one of the great leaders, still one of the great leaders in mindfulness. What I found was that it's sort of everything that I do in my life. I kind of cherry pick. I'll grab a little prayer. I'll do some mindfulness. I'll be very attentive to my breathing. I'll also aim for transcendence, which is what I learned with TM. I put it all together, and guess what I have? I found something that actually works for me.
Nice. Thank you for saying that, because it's so important for people to hear this.
Well, you gotta walk the talk, for crying out loud,
Yeah, Dr. Peeke, in the old days, when I was in the 60s, when I was growing up, people smoked, doctors smoked, people smoked on television, and then one day they discovered, cigarettes were actually hazardous to the health, and the Surgeon General put little warnings on the cigarette cartons. Do you think that there will come a time where the sugar industry and the processed food industry will also be held accountable to the damage that they're doing?
That's a tough one. The lobbies are so powerful. Everything is so, intimately related. It's a very, very tough one. What I can tell you is we're going to be voting with our feet, meaning that I want to see every one of you out at farmers markets. Let's keep that, farm to table thing going. We vote by what we buy. And then, to show, parents get up and show outrage at the junk that serve kids in schools, because this isn't right. And, if you serve them wonderful stuff at home, and if you're mentoring and role modeling them and they're getting trash at school, then, I'm going to see everyone out there just marching to the school saying, we're not taking this anymore, and really push and be perseverant and persistent about this. We could do it in our own front trenches. And then, it's interesting, the big food companies and the beverage companies will hear this in bits and pieces, but we can only control what we can control. How about little microcosms of change? And if we get enough of those, we got ourselves a little revolution.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. What's your take on abstinence? I've interviewed some of the food addiction people, and they are real clear about that. If you suffer from food addiction, which they believe is basically refined carbohydrate addiction, sugar, flour, alcohol, that you got to draw a line in the sand and never have sugar, flour, alcohol again. What is your stance on abstinence? Do you think it's necessary for all food addicts, or depending on the continuum that maybe your addiction falls on, whether or not you could actually ever indulge in these things again?
Okay, so I deal with this in my book, The Hunger Fix, and what I say is that there are many resources out there. There are many resources. And my philosophy is that whatever works for you, that's wonderful. Because there is a huge spectrum. There's plenty of room for people to be able to cobble together what they need. And what I have found as a physician and an expert in this field is that when it comes to food, people oftentimes float in and out of their resources. I spoke to a woman the other day who dropped 120 pounds over time. She went to OA for quite some time, Overeaters Anonymous, and is very respectful of OA. And then at some point, she just simply said, I just think I would like to spend more time right now in my life with a therapist and process some more things that have really been an issue for me. Okay, and so then she floated over there. She did very well with that. And then she went into, she said, I want to become more physically active, and I really want to dedicate a lot of my stuff to that. Became more athletic, floated into that. Didn't need the therapist as much anymore. This was going on over 25 years. It was very interesting to watch. So, whereas if you're a cocaine addict, you're either on the bus or you're off the bus. There is no discussion here. I'm not putting you on a mild dose of cocaine during that. It's just not happening. Okay, so when it comes to, obviously illicit drugs, when it comes to alcohol, for which you've run into every single problem in the book, all right, you're on the bus, you're off. You have two choices, all right? That's it. When it comes to food, there's a much wider spectrum of manifestation.
Yeah.
And also, you could be of any size. One of my toughest clients that I work with is a woman who's a size 4, and she just lives on a certain amount of cookie dough every day. Crazy. That's all she lives on. She's got all kinds of issues here. She had a very, very, very tough traumatic background, and so she's kind of gone to this chronic restrictive thing, but it's highly addictive. And so I'm working with her at the same time. I did a big Today Show piece on one of my clients I worked with in residence who, began with me at 344 pounds. That's right, 344 pounds. She just announced today she's down 116 of those pounds as we're working on this. And she's interesting. She's vegetarian, and she just switched it all out. And if you go to my website as well as my Facebook, you'll see the story of Sandy Leonard from Tennessee. And, here's a woman who just simply learned how to be able to put all of these other elements together and never really found that an OA type template worked for her, because she actually tried it once and it just simply, for whatever reason. So I say try the shoe on, see how it works for you. You might want to think about putting together a number of pieces of the puzzle for yourself. I like the way you put it, which is the way I put it, AJ. There's just a spectrum, a very wide spectrum. You don't get a wide spectrum with cocaine. You're on the bus, you're off the bus. But with food, and I actually even have in my book, The Hunger Fix, a page or two, actually more than that, on re-exposure at some point. Some people can do very well with that if it's controlled. They've experimented. They've gone through what I call master recovery. They've developed a recovery-centric lifestyle, and they do actually incredibly well. Other people, not so much, and that's fine. Yeah. It's good. You just have to know what's good for you.
Sure. Yeah, that makes complete sense. This is like a problem that our ancestors didn't seem to have to deal with,
Well, we didn't have Doritos then.
Yeah.
We didn't have, what I call the uber reward stimulators for the brain.
Yeah.
An apple doesn't do this. I don't know anyone who just grabs an apple and then, runs around trying to find 100 more and becomes an apple head. Your brain loves apples. It's like, yeah, this is good. But the brain doesn't know what to do with, Twinkies. It's like, what?
Sure.
Your husband may have a Twinkie and walk away and go, well, that was sort of an interesting experience. Someone else may just start foraging around and hop in the car and run over to, their local 7-Eleven and score everything they can grab. it's the full spectrum.
It seems like dopamine has become like the neurotransmitter du jour, that every time you have this conversation or read something about it, they're talking about dopamine or the dopamine reward cascade. And, can you talk a little bit about foods that naturally boost dopamine? I know you had said that there's precursors to dopamine, I believe tyrosine and phenylalanine, and that we should eat foods that are high in these, correct?
Well, yes, but the other thing, too, that I want to, caution you about is that you can increase, and I have charts of this in the book, but the most important thing, it's interesting, you're the dopamine, AJ, because you're the one who will teach people how to make the food so wonderfully tasty, right? So I could tell you a certain food, I could tell you could just go on out there and grab that wonderful chicken and the salmon and all the rest of it, but you're the one who's going to help them turn it into something that is savory, delicious, and absolutely, will, without a doubt, increase their pleasure. That's how you get the dopamine going more than anything else. You're the master crafter at that one, AJ, and this is why people depend upon you. So if they look helplessly at a salmon, you see 900 possibilities. They see, well, there's the salmon. Now what do we do? Right?
I think all these other tools you've mentioned, though, like the physical fitness and the meditation, when I meet people that are, overweight and wanting to lose weight, or that are food addicts, it doesn't seem like either of those are practices that they engage in, the exercise and the meditation. And I think just even starting those are very helpful to people.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm telling everyone out there that, it's an integrative approach. It has to be. You're not a science fair project. You're not robots. And, when I first started writing the book, I went around and I interviewed all kinds of big addiction facilities, and I asked them little questions like, well, what do you do for nutrition? And then there was this dead silence. I said, excuse me, hello, anyone there? And they said, well, what do you mean nutrition? And I said, well, what do you feed them? And the answer was almost unanimously the same at that time. And this was about 4 years ago. They said, you know something? Who cares what they eat, so long as they're not robbing a bank or stealing from their mother. If they eat birthday cake all day, who cares? And that was the answer I got. And then I said, well, what about physical activity? Well, whatever. If they want to take a walk, that's good. If they don't, so what? Then I said, meditation. Well, it's the 11th of the 12 steps. It's meditation. Yeah, what they do is they give lip service to it. They say, well, make sure to read it and whatever and pick up a meditation. And then at the end of the day, people go through detox and whatever recovery, come out clean, have no lifestyle template to live off, and they just keep repeating the same mistakes again and again. They'll self-soothe, they'll run into the same problems, relapse, and they're right back to go again. It's a terrible thing to do to someone. They need to have a lifestyle template. And nutrition, physical activity, and work with the mind, it's just they just literally go hand in hand, and you've got to have all three.
Well, it's sort of like you fix the brain and the body follows.
You think? And that's what I always say.
Yeah,
that's what I've always said, AJ.
Right.
That's my template. It's my motto.
And too many people are working on the symptom of the overweight or the obesity, and they're having gastric bypass, but they're never changing their behavior, and they're never changing their brain.
You got to go to the why. It's the power why. That's what I call it. Capital W, capital H, and Y. It's the why. What happened? Go back, revisit, process, reframe, redefine. Okay, and then once you do that, you take control. You're not going to listen to voices in your head anymore that said you're not worthy and all the rest of it. And then you make up your own voices saying you're ugly, you're a loser, you're undisciplined, you have no will, whatever the issue is. And instead start saying very empowering, self-dialogues. once that starts rocking, we can finally get this situation under control. And, people need guidance with this. And this is why I say, in the best of all worlds, you help put together an A team. And as I said before also, I'm more than happy to help whomever, just with the education I have already. And sharing with you right now, AJ, is a real gift. I love to help people this way, so that they can take this information and put it to practical use.
And you mentioned a few times your clients. So, I mean, could people, I think you live in Maryland, is that correct? Is that where
most of my clients are all over the world.
But could somebody listening that's inspired, could somebody become your client? Is that a possibility?
Absolutely.
Wow.
No question.
That's amazing. Yeah. That is so awesome.
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm a teacher, I'm a physician, I'm trying to help people here. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I do this wonderful collaboration with marvelous people like you, AJ, because, we're kind of kindred spirits.
Yeah.
Trying to be able to help folk, because for so long, I mean, this, you've been looking at this field for a long, long time. People have just been struggling. It's been a terrible challenge, and they haven't had any science.
Right. And you had mentioned a client of yours that was a size 4, and I have some clients that are, quite slender, and I think they suffer as much as those that are heavier, because it's the brain, it's the addiction, and they feel just as bad, even though their outside may look, quote, normal to people. And, I think they suffer just as much, if not more.
Well, they do it, you're absolutely right, because no one believes them.
Right.
No one believes they're suffering.
Oh, exactly.
At all.
Exactly.
So it's like quiet suffering.
Yeah. Suffering in silence. I actually going to be speaking this September at the McDougall Advanced Study Weekend, and when he invited me, I was like, oh, please have Dr. Peeke there. I was like, because I wanted to meet you so bad. I was hoping that you would be coming back.
Hey, you and I have this funny feeling, are going to be doing some work together. So I think that we're going to have plenty of opportunities to probably rock and roll.
I've admired you for so long. Now, one of the things I heard you say is that everybody wants weight loss right now. They're not interested in slow, gradual, or sustainable weight loss. And I find that to be true as well.
Well, you know what I say? I say, there are some amazing, wonderful benefits and little gifts you can give yourself almost immediately. But, they involve things like, that glow in your skin, that energy, better sleep, better relationships. All of that begins almost immediately as you're beginning this entire process. What I can tell you is that if you could just stay persistent and perseverant over time, you will most definitely find the one thing you want, which is not weight loss, as it were. It's sustainable weight loss.
Yes.
I could, listen, if you want to drop a few, I'll just lock you in a closet somewhere, all right? And God bless, and that's not what's going to help you here. What's really going to help you is the ability to be able to, drop the excess body fat that your body does not need in a way that is loving, self-loving, supportive, compassionate, forgiving, and just empowering. And you want to do it in a way that you own. And then you want to define your own sense of self. Quit comparing yourself to other people. Just be so happy you have a strong, amazing body that is going to be able to propel you to do the things that you want to do, to live your dreams. And, all this, I want, be skinny and all. Oh, I hate that word. Instead, how about fit and healthy? Yep. And you define that. Just start on the journey now, yep. And amazing things will happen. You just have to hang in there. What in your life have you ever done that's incredibly worthwhile that you were able to achieve in 5 minutes?
Nothing.
How about nothing?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay? So come on. This is no different. Exactly. This is your body. This is your mind. This involves your spirit, your very spirit. So it's important to keep all of this in mind so that you're able to calm yourself down. I always, call it, taking a little 2x4 to my head every time I try to get ahead of myself. So I like smack myself, go, wait a minute, pop myself back into reality here, right?
Yep. Oh boy, yeah. I enjoy talking to you so much. You know what? And we're almost out of time. But one of the things I'd like to ask you, it's just kind of a fun question because I ask just about everyone I interview, who inspired you, Dr. Peeke, either in your personal life or your professional life? I just love to hear who made you so awesome.
And it's an interesting question. I would probably have to say one of the places I go is it's so interesting. It's just science, scientists in general. I was very fortunate to be able to meet some extraordinary scientists in my life. I went to Berkeley, and I actually have 3 degrees from the place. I don't think I wanted to leave. Don't make me leave. I don't want to go to medical. No, but when I stayed there, I was surrounded by amazing minds that taught me something incredible, and that was that if you work hard enough, you could find that the mind, body, and spirit through, when we were studying science, can reveal secrets and amazing answers to mysteries, and then you take that and you put it to life. It's just incredible. So I had quite a few of those at Berkeley that just turned me on all the way through, starting with Melvin Calvin, who won the Nobel Prize for the first identifying the first 10 steps of photosynthesis. And he was just, you know what he would say? He would say, he would turn around, and he wasn't exactly the warmest person on the planet, but he would turn around to all 500 of us, nice little comfy organic chem class, and he would say, "Are you in pain?" When we were studying, really hard, because we were like, "Oh, this is hard." And he says, "Are you in pain?" And then we go, "Yes." And he goes, "Good, that I know you're learning."
Oh,
because it's like a little price you pay. It's just funny little things like that. Always worked.
So you liked it when they talked nerdy to you, huh?
Oh, dude, listen, I'm a total geek. You know it, AJ. Come on. You're outing me here big time.
When I look at you, you look like a movie star. You look like just a beautiful actress, and you're so eloquent, but really deep down inside, you're kind of a science nerd.
I'm a total science nerd. I mean, if you saw me in my laboratory, it's wire rims, hair tied back. It's scary. Yeah, it's pretty scary.
Well, you have just been, I could talk to you all night. You've just been an absolute delight, Dr. Peeke. And I thank you so much, not just for your time, but for writing the book, The Hunger Fix, which I recommend to everyone listening to rush out and buy right now on Amazon or at your bookstore, and for your expertise and for your passion and for bringing this to the forefront, something that I've struggled with most of my life and so many people. And you're giving it the credibility that now people are really, believing that this is real.
Oh, wonderful. I mean, thank you for this opportunity, and I hope to be able to play with you in your sandbox even more.
Me too. And if you want to get in touch with Dr. Peeke, she mentioned her Facebook page that she even reads it, and you can even message her, and her wonderful website, Dr. Peeke, DRPEEKE.com. You have some amazing videos. I watched all of them this week. I loved them all.
Woohoo! There you go.
So some of them are even an hour long. So if you need more of a Peeke fix, that's where you can get it. So Dr. Peeke, once again, thank you so much for your time, and thanks to all of you for listening to Healthy Living. I'm Chef AJ, and I make healthy taste delicious. Good night, everyone.